Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip.
This is Bo.
And we are here in the Bat Cave, and it is 2014.
Happy New Year.
Booyah. That's
what
right.
a year this looks to be on Homebrewed Christianity.
That's right. But if you're sitting here saying, like, could it be better than 2013, then the answer is yes. And if you're sitting there saying to yourself, exactly how good was 2013, then you need to go over to TNT, because there is an entire TNT episode where we tell you just all the business that got done in 2013, all the theological hype that was brought, the nuggets of audiological goodness that were delivered, and you find out who is Deacon of the Year.
And we talk about all of the live events, and we did not realize how many live events we did until we did this best of the year.
Yeah, then we counted.
Yeah.
Which is not something theologians
No,
tend to
generally
do.
we're not great at math.
We only count donations at church, how many souls we baptized, and maybe copies of the Jesus film we took to our neighbors.
Yeah, or our extra copies of theological books we have.
Oh, yeah, I do have that.
We keep track of that.
Well, I buy copies of a few books every time I see them used to hand out, like
You have to.
Ponenberg's Theology and the Kingdom of God.
Right.
It's my favorite nerd track.
Yeah, you're like an evangelist.
Yeah.
It's quite a promise.
Anyway, so this
Hey,
is...
speaking of promises.
Oh, well done. So today, Bo, we have an amazing interview with a young, fresh theological voice, and Gregory Walter is a professor at St. Olaf, and his book is one of the 5 books, my favorite of the year.
Wow.
And it was on a blog post. If you read when I blog, of course, it was right off the front page fast, because you blog all the time.
I can barely keep track of my own blogs.
Well, the title is Being Promised, Theology, Gift, and Practice.
This interview is a little different than most, because in many interviews, the heavy stuff is up front, and then you can kind of see it losing steam. This one actually builds as it goes. So if listeners are tuned in for the first, say, 15 minutes, you're kind of going to get a general introduction, but it's at about minute 20 that it gets really interesting. It takes a turn.
I know. I told Bo, I was like, so I was having so much fun, I may have recorded an hour and 40 minutes. And so you'll just figure out how to cut it down and get to the fun stuff fast. But I will say one thing about the book. Being Promised is only like 100 pages. It's a wonderful conversation with these kind of philosophers, sociology and stuff like that, around the notion of gift. It's a kind of postmodern exploration of classical Lutheran theology that is easy. It's easy to read, understand, and easy to see why it would be practical in your congregation.
Trip, I think what would be good for people to hear real quick, so that they know initially what you're talking about, help people understand just really quick the difference between law and grace.
Oh, so Luther,
Yeah.
Martin Luther, the reformer, way he frames his theology, like, as an open relational theologian like myself, you kind of begin with everything's relational, God is love, and then you could start doing theology. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Luther helped frame his theology was these 2 different addresses from God: the address of the law, and then the address of grace or promise, and that's kind of a running framework for Luther. And in Christ, Luther would say, the event of grace, of the promise, and that kind of thing. And it's that dynamism that gets explored. And what happens in the book and in our conversation, it's like, let's bring a sociologist in this. Let's bring philosopher. Let's talk about Derrida. Let's talk about Eberhard Jungel and this kind of thing.
With an umlaut.
Yes.
So the reason that's important is because you guys just use that as a starting point in this interview. But if people aren't familiar with it, Trip, a lot of people on a basic reading of the Bible, they come up with the idea that law is bad and grace gets us out of the law. And so the Old Testament is all the laws, and the New Testament is all grace, and it's an oversimplified dichotomy between those two.
Yeah.
So if you come in with that understanding,
the law is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's like I remember when in 7th grade I was driving down the street with my dad, and we were going to school, and he starts laughing because of someone's like vanity license plate and had a joke in it. And I'm like, Dad, what's so funny? He's like, oh, did you see the license plate? And I'm like, you can read license plates? And he's like, you can't read them in the car? It's like right in front of us. And I was like, no, you need glasses. Well, then you put on glasses, and all of a sudden, reality is more clear. Mm-hmm. So the law is while it does, in a sense, has this kind of condemnation and that kind of tone to it. But one of the other things it has is it's like glasses. You start to see reality as it really is, and then you recognize that there is a gift to reality that it can't have in itself, and that is the gift of grace. That is the gift, that justification that comes through Christ. It's a gift of that newness is something that is given to the world, to the condemned, and it's pure grace. So the law actually is like getting glasses, and you're like, oh, I am a sinner, and then the Gospels, yes, but you can be a saint as well. So
good stuff. By the way, my friend has a 3-year-old, and he's kind of clumsy, and they took him, and it turns out that he needed glasses, and they put his new glasses on him for the first time, and guess what he said? I can see the floor.
Ooh.
He couldn't even see the floor, and they're like, oh my goodness, this is why he runs into everything.
Anyway, so...
I can see the floor.
So thank you, Homebrewed Christianity Deacons, for checking out this podcast. You'll notice at the end that Gregory and I get in a little discussion about the Hobbit,
I
the
like
new
that
Hobbit
part.
movie.
Yeah,
and it was
he
so
teaches
exciting.
a course on Tolkien.
I know, and so I have this idea that we should do a live, video podcast on the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit.
Will we be in costume?
And theology, and it'd be like we did with the Caputo book party, and we'll get Gregory on there. And we'll all get in our videos, and we'll just, find a place we can do it while smoking our pipes and talk about The Hobbit.
This is a great idea.
Yeah.
At the end of this interview, you guys have so much fun comparing notes on Tolkien, and I mean, it's like a nice gift at the end.
And we're kind of like newbies on G-Chat together, so we've been conversing about our feelings of the new Hobbit movie after our first and second and third viewing. So anyway...
All right, so here is Greg Walter. Enjoy. Let us know about gift and promise, law and grace. We love your thoughts. Come to the Speak Pipe and give us some feedback.
Yeah, that's that little button on the side of the website, homebrewedchristianity.com. Click it. Talk to us. You can also sponsor the podcast by clicking the PayPal donate button. And you can, like all the cool deacons, just click through to Amazon on any of the links, buy whatever you want, and we get a portion back. Y'all did it very well at Christmas, I'd say.
Being Promised, Theology, Gift, and Practice.
Buckle up.
Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and today we are talking with Gregory. He's on the other line. Now, do you go by Greg, or do you go by Dr. Walter, or Gregory?
You can just call me Greg.
All right, Greg, author of Being Promised, Theology, Gift, and Practice. One of the things I really liked about your book, well, this one, I think, not only communicates to a larger audience, but also is able to connect discussions in the Christian tradition, practices like the Eucharist and stuff, but also a rich discussion about the notion of promise out of Luther on, and some of the contemporary philosophers today, like Derrida and such.
Yep.
So I wonder if we could begin before jumping into where a lot of the Homebrewed Christianity listeners, they heard the word gift and they're just ready to go, and they're like, oh yeah, let's talk about some gift here. Maybe you could, before that, just kind of talk about the unique notion of gift and the promise of the gospel and the kind of the law and gospel formula in Luther, and how, as someone who grew up Lutheran, you kind of inherited that tradition. How did you come to know it growing up before you started connecting the dots with different kind of phenomenological understandings?
Yeah, sure. For me, learning law and gospel, or law and promise, as Melanchthon puts it in the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, is largely, it's sort of like the thing, the whole point of what you're supposed to be listening for, how one reads Bible. And I can definitely track moving both from a very facile understanding that law is what you should do, and then gospel is sort of the rescuer to sweep in. to more an understanding of law as pointing out law is both Torah, commandment, but more generally the sense that law is the call, what phenomenologists would call the call, how the world, the other, the chair, the dirty dishes, and the sink all are calling for action. They're all calling for love. They're all, the neighbor's has need. And so, and the gospel is that which frees us to be able to do those things, which wakes us up. And so I always understood law and gospel to be primarily preaching things, but also a kind of interpretive stance to understand, to discern. And I don't know that I would say that it was sort of like a big framework for the entirety of theology. I know some Lutherans have tried to do that. But in those very circumscribed tasks, I think that's sort of how I came to think about law and gospel. And that what I was shocked to do was start discovering that not only did Lutherans wrangle immensely about law and gospel, but that Melanchthon never even talked about it in those terms in the Augsburg Confession, the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, that he preferred law and promise, and that what was particular or unique about the gospel was that it was a promise. And it's really there that Robert Jensen, his work, really was an initial important early stimulus for me when I was an undergraduate. That promise was exactly the thing that is the gospel thing. That whatever a promise is what differentiates it from all the other words and acts of communication and interpretation that we engage. And that so promise must be the special thing that is deserving. And so when I was an undergraduate, the really big, really valuable analysis was the book by the late Ron Thiemann on promise. And he uses speech act theory, as many people have, to try to make sense of promise. And that was really my starting point until I discovered other interesting things, such as that fantastic word, gift.
So early in the book, you talk about the way you kind of connect the dots between promise and its relationship to the kind of phenomenological conversation around the gift. Can you kind of spell that out for us? But assume we'll have people that may not be familiar with the theological substance of promise or the conversation around gift.
One of the things that since promise is the primary example that J.L. Austin the philosopher J.L. Austin, in his formulation of speech acts or the performative, it's his main example before he turns to other kinds of examples. It's no wonder that theologians and philosophers generally go to speech act first for thinking about promise. And in the book, I point out a little bit what the shortcomings of that line of thinking about promise encounters. But the reason I turned to gift was a couple of things. I had really been interested in how Milbank and Caputo had been doing gift. And so I started really reading around in Derrida, trying to find ways that he was writing about promise. And so I chased, thinking about various very highly idiomatic Derrida lines of inquiry about promise, things like the messianic or other facets of his engagement with Austin. And I only found a few things, kind of stray marks here and there about promise, his reflection on promise. And it was in those just kind of little bits of pieces of promise, and that he started to think. He wrote a little bit on promise and gift. These are in some smaller things, pieces that he wrote on hospitality. I do not think that these things are in English, and you can find them in references to them in the book. But that's what I thought, well, wait a second here. Maybe there's a way to think about promise as a kind of gift. What is it that is there anyone has done that? And when I looked at some classical theologians like Aquinas or Augustine on promise, both of them tend to talk about promise in gift terms, but not in the kind of gift that the post foundationalists or the phenomenologists talk about. And I was especially kind of shocked by one of the ways that Augustine talks about it in his book on the Trinity, that he said, we see it as a promise, but to God it's a gift. Primarily because he said, well, to us, promises take time, but for God that sort of time taking can't occur. So what is gift in eternity is promise in time. And I thought, boy, there's a lot here. There's a lot here that could be done.
One of the questions I have is that might help people kind of get where you're going in the book is early on you talk about this return of promise into kind of the theological category as a theological category, and that for you not only is that return interesting, but that it opens up the possibility of what you call a post-foundationalist theology.
Yeah.
Maybe you can say something about that, because post-foundationalist, there's a lot of people that put the word post in front of things. Yeah. There's lots of critiques of foundations, but not often do you see these kind of critiques of foundations or meta-narratives or these logocentric forms of Christian theology.
Yes.
You don't usually get posting them using these rather confessional, sacramental type understandings. So maybe you can tell us a bit about your post-foundationalist flair.
There's a couple ways into that. First of all, promise obviously is not new to me in the 20th century. It's something that there's no red thread going through the 20th century either, even though I kind of give a brief review of the highlights. But promise's return in the 20th century kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the eschatological return in the 20th century, both the biblical as well as the Moltmann or Pannenberg or Jungel or Jensen-inspired turns to eschatology. Now, I think all of this, what does this all have to do with post-foundationalism? By that, I mean a specific understanding of what gets theology going, or what justifies the theological enterprise, what makes it work as a way of thinking and arguing, what makes it legitimate. And under a foundationalist scheme, I understand that to mean that theology has to make available kind of indubitable foundations or grounds for its claims. So, for instance, the proof of God's existence was one such claim, or other sorts of things that are indubitable or claims that are undeniable. Now, a post-foundational approach is going to say that that kind of foundational project just is not going to work. And so what I think is fascinating about promise here, and why I turn to the tools that I do in phenomenology, is that I think that promise, because it is a gift, is going to enable us to see how theology can work from it and work with it without it being a foundation that offers certainty. In other words, theology can proceed in promise. It can dwell in promise. It can work off of promise, while promise is still murky. While if the primary way that God deals with the world is through promise, it's going to be require trust, risk. It's going to be murky. It's going to require that God's promise could be broken. A promise that's not breakable is no promise at all. And so to pursue a post-foundational theology, I think, with promise is to embrace those sorts of risks.
But maybe one of the ways of clarifying it is, where is the risk? I mean, because, see, there's a sense in which a promise is something that may not be fulfilled, and you're risking, like, is God as good as God says God is?
Yes.
But there's also, having looked at this rigorous certainty, this absolutism and stuff in the Christian tradition or in philosophical inquiry or in Enlightenment rationalism, that what we chastened ourselves. The masters of suspicion are there. That we're calling into question our certainty and certitude and things. And then there's a risk of, well, having been chastened, can we risk speaking theologically again? Can we risk talking about God again? Can we risk sounding Christian? Or should we not risk it anymore and maybe just talk about ultimate reality or or something like that? What is it that enables someone to kind of make that turn from not just risking the identity of God being who God revealed God's self to be in Christ, but also this risk of speaking again in Christian language, in these, trying to wrestle with these big questions in a distinctive cultural linguistic kind of framework?
I think promise can do that, both uphold the kind of critique that is generated by radical modernity, the worry about do I know what I know, but also what kinds of ideology or pathology is supported by these claims. Promise can risk all that because it is a pledge of something forthcoming. I think there's a lot of because it privileges possibility or Christian claims as being possible, or I almost want to say poetic in the sense of a kind of risked speech that is risked on the basis of how credible, how trustworthy, how persuasive this promise of the crucified one is. And so theology is risky by embracing the very character of promise. And so I think that's one of the real needs, real values, I think, of what I'm trying to do in the book, which is to offer readers a critical vocabulary for talking about promise in a way that they don't sneak in the foundational project. Again, the way they don't sneak in or kind of diffuse the risk of promise in a way that upholds how dangerous it is to live with a God who promises.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things you talk about is that a promise, you give this kind of little definition about the promise as a gift doubled and extended over time.
Yes.
Can you spell that out a little bit? Because what you end up doing in the book with the notions of power and the question around sovereignty and things only becomes possible when you kind of expound the notion of promise in a different way or from a different slant than is traditionally done.
Talking about promise as a speech act, or in other traditional ways, like there's a fantastic little chapter on promise in David Hume's Treatise on Human Nature, where he says he kind of throws up his hands, trying to sort out what a promise is or what sort of moral force it has, or obligation it involves, because he says it's more mysterious than transubstantiation. He says, I know this is something the papist. A promise is more mysterious than anything the papists say about their own church, he says. But talking about it as a double and extended gift is just to really think about how promise always involves the making of the promise and its fulfillment, first of all. So when I make you a promise, I do it. I extend it. Whether it's giving you my word in the very act of making the promise, or whether I sign a document, or whether I give you a down payment, I am making it. I am making it. And so there is always, I think, part of my job in the book is to show that there is first one kind of a gift. There's one sort of gift moment, which is this making of the promise. And then there's the delivery. It's the promise's final delivery, fulfilling the promise, making good on the promise. That is, there's the promise of a car, and then there's the actual fulfillment of giving the car, and both of them are gifts. And the gift is also the promise is also extended, an extended gift, because it involves necessarily a kind of delay. Promises require time; they take time in a way that is very specific to promise. And so, all the other things that I work out in the book are different meditations, as it were, on that basic definition of promise. And so I really try to uphold what I find valuable in the speech acts stuff that a lot of theologians utilize. But I just don't think that the speech act stuff covers all the dimensions of promise well enough to be able to theologically profit from a promise construed this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things you do is you kind of talk about the promise, and when you connect it to the gift, you point out that the promise and the gift is also a practice, and that opens up avenues or conversations to be extended past just kind of a theological understanding of what God did in Christ and that kind of thing, but also helps us come to deal with questions around hermeneutics, questions around ethics, that it expands the conversation. Expands the conversation out. For those that are start to get worried the moment they hear this notion of gift as practice, as if somehow Greg's starting to think that we contribute something to salvation. If they start having these kind of questions coming up in their head, can you say a bit about what you mean as you start expanding the notion of gift? Getting into conversations around ethics and stuff.
Yeah. Well, gift and ethics is probably one of the more incredible parts of the whole gift tradition. As folk may recall, the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss's famous book on the gift concludes with a long meditation on how Mauss believes that if his contemporary society were to embrace the reciprocal gift that he discusses in the book, life would be more humane. He thinks that there would be less alienation in public life because the circulation of gifts would bring with it renewed and strengthened social ties. Social life would be much more, would be warmer in his imagination. And so all along there's been a kind of side conversation about gift and ethics. And so when theologians take up gift, it should not be surprising that they also can think about salvation in mind, salvation and ethics through the lens of gift. And the reason practice is involved in the title and in the book is because if promise is extended, that means that there's time in between God's pledge of Christ as well as opportunity as possibility for Christian action, for action. And so part of the burden of the last two chapters is to reflect on how it is that ordinary practices, whether they belong in sort of have the trademark of Christian or not, are all things that are part of this web of practices that can be engaged by promise. And what I mean by that is that promise can afford a kind of critical reorientation. To dwell in the promise of the crucified one, as I try to get a handle on it in the book, is to have a chance to think critically and constructively about everyday life, about ordinary practices. Hospitality is one thing I take up with the Eucharist. I also talk a little bit about recognition, which is a bit more abstract. But there's ways to think about practice as something that is part of an already existing economy of the world that promise can interact with, both critically and in terms of a kind of liberative moment. I could say more about that, but I want to see where you want to go with that.
Well, I think one of the kind of background conversations that that section of the book's coming out of is one that has a lot to do with the changes in the doctrine of God. You highlight in a section where you kind of dialogue with Eberhard Jungel the priority of possibility over actuality in kind of our theological categories.
Yes.
When you all of a sudden make the risk of promise, the genuine openness of history and time, all intrinsic to the nature of the God who promises, then you've actually shifted our understanding of God rather dramatically from kind of a Christian theology with its big Aristotelian roots and understanding of divine perfection. So maybe you can say a little bit about just how radical that the openness, that risk is when you introduce this notion of promise into kind of just classical theism's understanding of God.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Jungel here, and he's one of the reasons I take his lead on this, perhaps a little bit more than Jensen or also any number of theologians who follow Whitehead or Deleuze on these things, is because what Jungel tries to argue in his God as mystery of the world is that it's one thing to say that God is possibility, or that God is sort of opened. That's interesting. That's fascinating. There's lots of good reasons to do that. But what he suggests is that a good way to do this is, we may get there, but a good way to do this is to take up as our cue the kind of possibility that emerges from the resurrection of the crucified one. So in other words, not try to seek out a kind of view of possibility that's going to be generally useful or in a kind of abstract way, but try to attend closely to Jesus' death and resurrection as a way to authorize, as it were, to be the poesis of a very specific kind of possibility. And so that to me was a way to think about promise, the particular kind of possibility that it tends to promise. And so this is sort of this might be one of the things that I find perennially useful in the tradition of theology coming from Karl Barth, which is to say, let's think about the specificity of this event and try to unfurl it from the event, from Jesus' death and the resurrection, try to see how this is the event of God, rather than fitting the event to God, the other way around. And I certainly know that lots of other thinkers could guide us in that kind of a path, but that's just my own biography on pursuing that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say I'm a big Jungel fan, and Ingolf Dalford, one of the professors at Claremont who took over at the Center for Hermeneutics after Jungel retired. When I had the Jungel seminar with him, I remembered one of the things he emphasized was that the unspeakability of God has a philosophical form and it has a Christian one, and that classically the unspeakability of God is established because of like the limits on human language or their ability to speak of God, and we're trying to figure out what signs can we use to point beyond ourselves. And then if you start framing talking about God that way, then you do negative theology by just saying, well, it's not that. Right. And that Jungel asked the question, or kind of posed it in a different way, and said, no, that God is asked about because God has already spoken, and that the event of revelation not only gives us the content of thinking theologically and stuff, but it also is the event is necessary for creating the impetus for the conversation itself.
Yeah. I think that's well put.
And one of the things that I think that does, and it connects to conversations that have been on the podcast related to Caputo and also with process and the notion of this kind of revival of weakness in philosophical theology. But it frames the question of divine power, providence, and stuff in a cruciform way. As opposed to out of a phenomenology like Caputo, or out of a metaphysical system like process theology and philosophy, that the notion of weak power comes out of the way power is framed when God creates the space for the question. So maybe you can kind of highlight how the conversation around weakness is different than our normal conversation partners on the podcast. Because I think it's very well articulated in the book.
I mean, the weak power stuff is really, 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 really valuable, because I think without it, you'd be forced in this either or situation, which would be intolerable, I think, for a lot of Christian theologians. You would be looking at a situation where you're either talking about the sort of nominalistic God who can do anything, and the utterly emptied kenotic God who can do nothing, right? So that, I mean, the choice seems to be either between a kind of sovereignty or no sovereignty at all. And so weak power, especially when we think about weak power as power in the sense both as giving to another. I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit, but also weak power in the sense of its productivity, its creativity, all comes really valuable for understanding what kind of power promise has. So if God's a promiser, if God acts as a God of promise, then this particular view of power, I think, follows or is part of the game. But back to weak power in the sense of Walter Benjamin. He's really a curious figure in all of this, and I haven't read Caputo's recent book. It's on the shelf. I just haven't gotten to it yet, but he kind of relies more on Derrida's interpretation of Walter Benjamin, and in talking about weak power through those two steps, that kind of obscures a little bit of the interesting things that occur in Benjamin's original articulation of weak power. And here's where it happens. It happens in this late work of his called On the Concept of History. And it's this multiple fragment thing multiple draft thing that he never published in his lifetime. But he talks about weak messianic power, and he actually has got a real curious source for that phrase. Sorting through the manuscripts, he was some scholars, in fact, the editor of the Italian version of Benjamin's works, Giorgio Agamben. Agamben discovered that Benjamin was trying to experiment with new ways of quoting people. So he wanted to develop this process called quotation without citation. And he's actually, in the phrase weak messianic power, he's actually quoting Luther there, Agamben found. And that the weakness is this twofold thing. It's weakness as gift and weakness as creativity. And it's the weakness as gift is a fascinating thing because it talks about giving, weakness as giving, as in giving another place, giving room. You might think of it as weak power as a kind of it's connections of hospitality. You might think, well, how does gift and hospitality work together? Well, for at least for Benjamin, it's like it's there. It's what it is. Hospitality is gift because it's giving another place. And weak power as productivity, as creativity, is to say that is to recognize the reliance to accomplish the intentions of the agent who has weak power on others. So, in a way, weak power, to talk about God as a weak power, I think it's very easy to enlist a lot of contemporary writers and thinkers who are talking about God more as companion than distant archon, more as friend than as opposite pole of being. And so I think all those metaphors are enabled for theology by embracing weak power, which again I think is still a very cool way to develop power, the kind of power that promise has, because promise depends for a successful promise, for promise to occur, it requires a kind of self divestment on the part of God. It requires a risk on the part of God, a giving up as well as a giving. And so without engaging all the discussion that I undergo in the book, I think weak power is I think a necessary way forward here for Christian ideas about God.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to follow up one about kind of the risk of promise as a category and in theology, and how would you kind of respond to Jungel's notion of addressing a Luther and Feuerbach at the end of God is the Mystery of the World, where Feuerbach sees that whole notion of God as love, where love is the subject and God as an unnecessary and forgettable predicate, and says, let's sacrifice God to love, or else we'll sacrifice love to God. And Jungel said, well, if you take traditional Lutheran thought, where you have like Deus absconditus, this kind of fear of God, the dark side of God, and then the love of God, this revealed God on the other side. In Luther, he said faith should be directed towards the loving side, the one side. But Jungel said that the statement that God is love is not that God has loved, that the is there is, a reference to the divine essence. And a person can exercise love, a person could have love or be loved, but when we say God is love, love is an identity statement. And in that sense, the self-revelation of God in Christ as the God who is love is a way of undoing that fear of God. That what is unknown, the unknown part of God, the absconditus, is part of what is unknown still coheres with the revealed essence of God as love. It's the unknown, unbounded love of God. That the mystery of God is love. The hidden parts are love. How do you kind of connect that back to this risk about the nature and character of God?
There are a lot of rich questions there, and I think that a lot of modern Trinitarian theology revolves around the things that a lot of directions that your question has, Trip. That's a very, very good question, because you can pose it to a lot of different theologians and perspectives and get very different answers. And I think this has to do with things like the various ways that God and God's self is related to God as God is revealed, or what is sometimes called the economic and immanent Trinity problem. The thing that I think Promise does for this question, and this could get into a little bit of Luther exegesis, is that Promise allows us the chance that God is not love while being God, the God of love. I think that what Jungel tries to do in that argument, in that way of trying to appropriate the history, hiddenness or mystery or absconsion of God, and sort of making it the hiddenness of love or some variation of that, is that it ends up erasing the risk of promise. And I think that's the sort of thing that could suggest that the promise isn't risky after all. God is love, and so God's capability of acting and fulfilling God's promise is sure. There's no doubt about it. As Thomas Aquinas talks about the virtue of hope, hope is trust in God's power. And while from Thomas's perspective, one cannot have certain faith, one can have certain hope, because if one knows God's power as unbounded, there's a way in which one's hope is always sure. There's a kind of certainty of hope that one can have because it rests in God's power. Now, Jungel wants to avoid all that with reformulating power, and he is dearly, dearly chastened by Dietrich Bonhoeffer's reflections on only the crucified God will do. But I think that to talk about God's hiddenness requires promise. That promise deals with it in a much different way, because it suggests that who God is and God's self is still up for grabs with the promise. By risking promise, by making promise, God's very identity may be well invested in utterly invested and disclosed in the crucified one. But whether it's true or not, or whether this God in fact is true by raising this crucified one from the dead, that is still under dispute. There's a little bit of Pannenberg here, I suppose, in me, as well as a little bit of more than a little dose of Whitehead, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But I think if we stick to the promise, and if we follow Jungel here and say, well, let's look at promise and try to fit our concept of God as love to that, we're going to be led down a different path than Jungel wants, where Jungel goes, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, I just I rarely get to interview people that footnote Jungel enough that I get to talk about it. So I may have got a little distracted.
I think he's great. He's much overlooked, sadly.
Yeah, and one of the things that he does, and it's connected to your discussion of the impure gift in chapter 4, and I but I didn't see it directly connected. But when he talks about the mystery of God, Jungel said that the mystery of God is God turning us into a mystery, where we come to receive more of who we are from God in the event of revelation.
Yeah.
And in your in the 4th chapter, The Impure Gift, you talk about the notion of interruption, and you say that to dwell in the promise as an interruption is to be a witness to an event that occurs utterly by surprise, perhaps beyond all hope, which allows one to risk, and most of all, to discover and shed light on the impurities of one's own life, the entanglements of one's own impure giving. Can you say a bit about this notion that both you and Jungel have, that when you start to re-understand the notion of God and the gift and the promise, that all of a sudden the mystery gets inverted, and what gets called into question, what's interrupted, is our life, as opposed to reorganizing our concepts.
Yeah, I think the force of promise, weak as it is to, if you trust it, if you trust that God promises life in the crucified one, that one dwells in the Spirit, promise that is Pentecost. One is it's similar to how what Derrida is after when he writes about the pure gift, the gift purified of all exchange, because on the one hand, when I've taught students Derrida's writings on the gift in a given time, they after they sort of wake up from the dizziness of it all and start to buckle down on it, they often wonder, well, all right, if the true gift is impossible, if the pure gift is impossible, what does that have to do with our lives? Well, how does that? We're just sort of clamoring after this reality that will never be or cannot be, depending upon how you take what Derrida means by impossible. The answer that I always give them is, I think, a good way to get into promise as interruption, which is to say that for Derrida, the very hope, the very, very impossibility that impossibility that the pure gift represents allows us it exposes what's going on in our ordinary exchanges. And so to have the world promised the gift of unending life in the crucified one is to expose and point out the infinite impurities that confront us in our own very selves and around us. And so, in a way, you might go back to the earlier law and gospel thing. Promise, the gospel is not all joy. It's as my son who just finished because of Winn-Dixie, it's the litmus lozenge. Do you know that, Trip?
No.
Because of Winn-Dixie, it's a kid's book, and there's a woman whose great-grandfather made these sweets called the litmus lozenge, and they're sweetness and sadness mixed into one. And so you can't taste the sweetness without the sadness. And so to trust promise is to be interrupted, because one receives something that is and is not, and to have that sort of thing that is called a pledge, a promise that is neither something nor nothing, is to have an orientation that exposes all of our other entanglements to view. And it's like getting the world again, but getting it again in a way that allows us to recognize our misrecognition, to turn us back to the world. And so I think part of the practical thrust of the book is to conceive of promise not merely as a way to sort out our thinking about God, but to understand that promise functions very practically as a kind of radical reorientation to everyday exchanges and economies.
So maybe you can talk about the Eucharist. I mean, you talk about it in the book,
Yeah.
and I think that for those that may not be as familiar with kind of the philosophical discourse that we've been having, if you relate it to the Eucharist, they'll see some legs show up on the ideas.
Sure. One of the things that I really wanted to do in the Eucharist chapter was to connect promise to liturgical practice, not just practice generally, but liturgical practice. And the last chapter tries to do a commentary, as it were, on Christian practice of Holy Communion, and it takes the form of a consideration of how Christ acts in the Last Supper narratives as a host. And it should be no surprise by now that as a host, he is a strange one and as a weak one. And what I wanted to do was to employ this concept, this examination of Eucharist, as a way to think about hospitality. Now, one of the things that when I hear discussions of hospitality or have read through discussions of hospitality in contemporary Christian reflection, one of the things that I am most dissatisfied with is to say that, we're not really the hosts here, Christ is. In other words, a kind of buck move where you displace the responsibility for hospitality onto Jesus, as if Jesus as the agent in the Christian community is going to be the true host. Now, what I do in the book is to show how, in particular with respect to Christian hospitality related to the Eucharist, is that it begins with betrayal. And what this does is to say that because the Eucharist is the place of promise, it is the giving of Christ's body and blood in a community of betrayal. And so what this means then is for hospitality is to say that Christ's hospitality, his weird hospitality, is a way for congregations, for Christian communities, to really kind of look at how they themselves are weirdly hosted by Jesus and to expose their own community's practices of hospitality. How are they doing it? What are you doing? Who are you recognizing? Who aren't you recognizing? What kinds of hosts are you acting as? How are you treating the other, the stranger, the visitor? How are you construing them in terms of their relationship to your community, your particular hosting? It's precisely to take Jesus as the weak host in the Eucharist, as sort of the Eucharist making the church kind of thing, is that it makes a Christian community the church by asking Christian communities to take responsibility for their hospitality and to give them a critical resource to not only shape it positively, but to have kind of an analytical tool in the Eucharist to think carefully about the hospitalities they are exercising already. So I think it's both critique and construction of the practices of hospitality.
So if you were sitting at on a committee at church, like the worship committee,
yeah,
and what kind of questions or suggestions and type of things would you be putting on the table to help your own faith community and the people start to wrestle with their responsibility around the Eucharist?
I would think that since sort of there's as almost any Christian I think is well aware in the United States, that there's quite a few things that are sort of changes that people try to make to be more hospitable. I would like to think more carefully about the use of space. How are we arranging our bodies and each other? How are we moving? How are we interacting with one another? And what does it say? Or how are we communicating place and recognition to each other in this space? If this is indeed the space where Christ's words are repeated, that Christ's promise is remembered here. And so, in a way, we are repeating and remembering that upper room, that act of weak hospitality. So I would want to focus on an analysis of space, first of all. And unfortunately, that's in most congregations, that's the thing that's least likely to change because you're kind of stuck with what you got in some forms of architecture. But I do think that how we move, how we enter, how we leave, all those things are related to situations of patron and client, social status, and all those things are things to which the Eucharist can speak, because the Eucharist is an act of hospitality. It's an act of hospitality of a particular kind, as I try to develop in that last chapter.
So, as a undergrad professor, and you mentioned a bunch of different types of classes that you get to teach, but but your school's also a historically Christian one, right?
Yes.
And so, how do these type of ideas and these type of challenges, how are they received by your undergrad students, especially those that are Christians? In reevaluating their own life and practices, and hearing kind of them begin to reflect on the communities that they come from.
I think it's. The practices of forgiveness and friendship are two practices that have a lot to do with gift, that are very easy to get a hold of. I think hospitality is a harder thing for an undergraduate to get at. Largely because they may not have a lot of first-person experience with having to be a host. But forgiveness and friendship are really accessible things, because they're things that rely upon every day. And so to talk about friendship and traditional forms of friendship, like from Aristotle or other philosophers, is just a really fascinating way for students to open up and consider how strange being Christian can be, because it just can warp and make very weird, very ordinary things like forgiveness and friendship. Talk about friendships that are so bizarre or so gracious as to reflect the kind of gift that God gives is just really, really fascinating and just fun to watch them wrestle with. Obviously, the easiest way for them to get a hold of this is when they think carefully about the friendships in The Lord of the Rings. In my Tolkien class, that's probably one of my favorite things to teach, because the students love the characters, and to have a chance for them to think carefully about the variety of friendships and the strangeness of a lot of the friendships and what they do, I think opens up new ways of practicing friendship for them, or at least ways to explore and make more explicit things that they already perhaps know intuitively.
All right, so I love the Tolkien stuff, and so I would feel bad if we didn't talk about it just a little bit more. I'm reading The Hobbit right now,
yes,
chapter a night with my 6-year-old boy, who
Good
is
for you.
Smitten with anything involving elves, dwarves, and swords. So maybe I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on the first part of the Hobbit movie. and kind of what you're looking forward to or worried about how they're going to handle, or kind of different things that are going on in the retelling of The Hobbit. Because one of the things, just reading through it again, is you start to notice how there's stuff from the Silmarillion being brought in that's not in The Hobbit. But
Absolutely.
also, expanded stuff for some extra good sword slinging. But if you're going in not just to see the visual effects and be drawn in the story, what kind of things are you going into it looking for?
Well, I have to say that I was really, really happy about the first part because, like you mentioned, the fact that the scriptwriter and Peter Jackson are all bringing in Tolkien's attempts to integrate The Hobbit fully into Middle Earth I just really, really appreciate that. I'm a little bit romantic about The Hobbit as it is, as a book, just because, that's the first one that I read before I read Lord of the Rings, and so I'm a little bit nostalgic for it in its original first two states. The state that you are probably reading it in, and most people read it in, is Tolkien's second go at it. After The Lord of the Rings was a success, he went back to the first version of The Hobbit and tried to connect it more readily with the world of Middle-earth. But it still remained an unfinished task that the filmmakers are just really doing a fantastic job at. I am very curious to see how, if at all, they're going to work Sauron into the new one. I was just awestruck with how well that was done in the first part of The Hobbit. I don't know. What did you think of Necromancer? How they put all that in there?
Oh, I really liked it, but I've found that I am not a movie critic. I'm a fanboy when it comes to this kind of stuff, and just the sheer joy of getting to when people bring it up and they're like, so what is that? How's that going on? Just to be able to, in the Silmarillion and that kind of stuff just makes me happy. One of the things I really liked in the way they brought in a lot of the extra stuff is that from very early on, the kind of Gandalf's kind of insight of the weak power of friendship and that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff,
yeah,
being highlit, and also the kind of perversion of this kind of top-down domineering power that you see in the kind of the extra scenes, and even the sensitivity of the weak. And you're like, oh, we got this crazy mushroom chewing hippie wizard running around with his nice little rabbits.
Radagast.
But it's that guy, that is the one that's sensitive to kind of this move and creeping power of evil and things, and everyone else kind of rolls their eyes. So when Radagast gets brought up, at the council with the elves and everything, I always think of it just made me think of the wise man story, where there's people out of nowhere coming around talking about a star, and they roll their eyes and that kind of thing. So I liked it a lot, but. And the dwarves' friendship. I thought they did a great job. Because it's hard to do what Tolkien does in the beginning of The Hobbit, where he just spends 60 pages, more or less, in that first chapter, just telling us about the dwarves, their friends, how they eat. Like, by the end of chapter 1, you know them, and you feel like this is a group that you're getting to know with a history and friendship, just like Bilbo's getting to know them.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that Tolkien has a bad rap on is that some criticize Tolkien's writing for the lack of depth to character, or that characters are fairly limited in, say, the range of passions. In other words, some people can criticize Tolkien for not being a realist novelist. But I think that you're mentioning the dwarves and the specificity of being a dwarf when you get at, I mean, the film version was a lot more comical, but the way in which they eat, the way the involvement of their singing, all of those things are a good way to just kind of get into what it is like to be a dwarf and be in this particular not just any old dwarf, but to be in this particular company. And I have to say that once we get to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, I am just, oh my goodness, I am just looking forward to Smaug. I just cannot wait.
I'm pretty excited.
Dragons are some of the most important things in existence, and to do a dragon right, oh man, I hope they do it well.
Well, if the other 4 movies are assigned to how it's going to go, it's going to be pretty exciting. And so okay. Last question: if you're sitting, one of the undergrad students comes up and you're pitching your Tolkien class, and they've seen the movies, and they're like, really, a whole class like deep thoughts about the Hobbit? What's that first question that you try to hook them with?
Yeah. Actually, it's about dragons. There's a little footnote in Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, which is more or less the basic text of the whole course. Is that he's got a little footnote. He says, "What is when a child asks, 'Are there dragons?' the only answer, the proper answer to give them is, there are no dragons in present-day Britain. Not that there aren't dragons, or they're only imaginary, but there are no dragons in present-day Britain." And the reason he answered that, the reason that's the only, I say, well, what's the, why is this? I ask the students, why? Let's talk about that. You talk about that with each other. Why is that the only answer? Why is that the best answer to give a young person asking, "Are there dragons?" And most of the rest of the essay on fairy stories is an answer to that. That the power of human creativity, the power of human imagination is fundamentally a creative, liberative power that shares in the creative power of God. And that a dragon is one of the most important beings for that very reason. What that has to do with promise, I don't know, but Tolkien is definitely more important than promise.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk and come on the podcast. And I hope that there's a Tolkien book in the works so that we can just spend a whole hour talking about Tolkien soon.
Thank you. There is, actually.
Excellent. Is it going to be ready for the last Hobbit movie?
I hope so. But it's currently in its planning stages. It's just fairy theology.
Nice.
My students always call my class pipeweed theology, but that may be a name that's lost on the reading audience.
Yeah. Well, do you require having corduroy jackets with leather elbow patches and a giant pipe just to be in the class?
No, but I do. There have more than a few students who have tried to start smoking because of it, smoking a pipe because of it.
I'm sure the parents are thrilled.
Yeah. All right.
Well, it was great to talk to you.
Thank you, Trip. It was great to talk to you.